What if everything you thought you knew about your life was suddenly turned upside down? Claire's journey started as a simple escape, but what she discovered along the way was far more than she could have ever imagined. Secrets buried deep within her past, unexpected apologies, and a decision that could change her life forever. But the biggest question is, can we truly outrun the ghosts of our past, or will they always come back to haunt us? You won't believe what happens next. Trust me, you won't want to miss the shocking twist that will leave you speechless. So, if you've been captivated by Claire's story so far, make sure you hit that subscribe button now. Don't let the story end here. Join us as we dive deeper into her journey. You won't regret it, I promise. Subscribe now and be a part of every heart-pounding moment. The cabin was quiet, the soft hum of the engines the only sound. The passengers settled into their seats, the lights dimmed for the evening flight. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh linens. She sat by the window, her fingers tracing the edge of her tablet, trying to distract herself from the long hours ahead. Her name was Claire, and she was used to traveling. But this flight felt different. A flight attendant, mid-30s with sharp eyes and a rigid posture, approached Claire. "Excuse me, miss," the flight attendant said, her voice carrying through the cabin. Claire looked up, surprised. "Would you mind turning off that device? We need to prepare for takeoff," the attendant ordered with a hint of impatience. Claire, momentarily caught off guard, nodded and complied. But something in the attendant's tone unsettled her. She had followed the rules. Why this sudden aggression? The attendant stood there, arms crossed, as if waiting for Claire to make a mistake. Then, the woman's words hit Claire like a slap. "Some people just don't know how to follow instructions," she muttered, loud enough for the entire row to hear. Claire's eyes widened. She glanced around, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. Her gaze shifted to the man sitting next to her, a stranger, who avoided eye contact. The flight attendant turned her back, but not before Claire caught the cold, dismissive glance she threw in her direction. Claire wanted to speak up, to correct her, but she didn't. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog. The plane began to taxi down the runway, its engines roaring to life. The wheels rattled over the tarmac as Claire leaned back in her seat. She closed her eyes, hoping to escape the lingering unease. But then, something unexpected happened. The voice of the pilot came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you aboard. We are proud to have you on this flight, and we hope you enjoy your journey with us." The words barely registered before they were followed by a second, almost in the same breath. "And a special thanks to Claire Harrison, our honored guest and the daughter of the airline's owner, for flying with us today." A sudden silence filled the cabin. The flight attendant, who had been so brash only moments ago, froze. Her back straightened, eyes darting toward Claire, her face going pale. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. She opened her eyes slowly, looking at the attendant, whose expression now mirrored that of a deer caught in headlights. The realization dawned on her. The flight attendant hadn't recognized her. She hadn't known who she was dealing with. And now, in front of everyone, the truth was clear. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Some passengers exchanged glances, a quiet murmur rising from the seats. Claire's fingers tightened around the armrest, the tension in her body palpable. Her heart pounded. She had no intention of revealing her identity, but fate had a way of doing it for her. The flight attendant stood there, stunned, as Claire met her gaze. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable and thick. Then, with a forced smile, the flight attendant stammered, "Miss Harrison, I didn't realize." Claire nodded slowly, her voice calm but firm. "It's fine," she said, her words sharp despite the quietness of her tone. The attendant tried to hide her embarrassment, but couldn't. Her eyes darted nervously, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her uniform. The cabin remained tense. Claire sat back, her fingers still gripping the armrest, but now it was not from fear. It was from a quiet power, a sense of control that she hadn't anticipated feeling in that moment. The flight continued, the soft click of the seatbelt sign barely audible over the hum of the engines. But Claire's mind raced. What had just happened? What was she supposed to do now? Her stomach churned, but the discomfort was no longer about the flight. It was about something deeper, something unsettling that she could not ignore. The flight attendant avoided her for the rest of the journey. The silence between them was thick with the unspoken. The passengers around Claire tried to act normal, but their eyes often flicked in her direction. And Claire, despite her efforts, couldn't shake the feeling that this flight was not just any flight. It was a moment that would change everything. For both her and the flight attendant. And as the plane ascended into the sky, so did the weight of the realization. She had witnessed something in the flight attendant's eyes. A reflection of fear. And perhaps, just maybe, regret. The flight seemed to stretch endlessly, each minute dragging on longer than the last. Claire could feel her pulse quicken with every passing second, her mind still reeling from the unexpected revelation. She stared out of the window, the ground far below now nothing but a blurred patchwork of lights and shadows. The flight attendant had disappeared into the galley after the pilot's announcement, but Claire couldn't shake the tension that hung in the air. She leaned her forehead against the cool window, willing the storm of emotions inside her to calm. The realization that the woman had disrespected her without a second thought gnawed at her. Why hadn't the attendant recognized her? Did she treat all passengers like that? Or was it just Claire's bad luck? The feeling of humiliation settled deep in her chest. She tried to breathe through it, but the weight of the situation pressed down on her with an intensity she wasn't prepared for. Her hand instinctively reached for her phone, but then she paused. No, not now. Not in the midst of this. She was Claire Harrison, the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the country. She had never been treated like this before, by anyone. There was always a certain level of respect that came with her name. But this woman had stripped that away in an instant. Claire's heart sank. It wasn't just about the disrespect. It was about the deeper feeling of isolation she had carried for so long. She thought of her father, of the empire he had built, of how everything in her life seemed to be defined by the name Harrison, a name that brought wealth and privilege, but also distance. People often saw her as nothing more than her father's daughter, a walking legacy that no one truly got to know. And this woman, this flight attendant, had no idea who she was. No idea of the name that followed her, the pressure that weighed on her shoulders every day of her life. She didn't see the girl behind the title. She didn't know what it was like to live in a world where expectations were always higher than she could reach. Claire's chest tightened, and she closed her eyes, trying to block out the thoughts. But they were impossible to escape. A sudden movement caught her attention. She looked up and saw the flight attendant walking down the aisle again, this time with a tray of drinks in her hands. Claire's heart raced. She didn't want to confront her. She didn't know if she had the strength for it. But she couldn't let it go. Not this time. The flight attendant's eyes flicked toward her, and in that split second, their gazes locked. The attendant's face went pale once again, her hands freezing midair as she attempted to pass the drinks to the passengers. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She had seen that look before, the one that betrayed more than just embarrassment. It was the look of someone who knew they had made a terrible mistake. A mistake that couldn't be undone. And Claire couldn't help but wonder, did she feel guilty for what she had said? Did she realize how much harm those words had caused? The seconds dragged on, the silence between them like an open wound. The attendant's hands trembled, and she quickly turned away, avoiding Claire's gaze as she continued down the aisle. Claire's mind raced. Why didn't she just apologize? But the woman never returned. The drink service continued, and the rest of the flight seemed to pass in a blur of awkward interactions and stolen glances. Claire tried to focus on her tablet again, but the words on the screen were a blur, her thoughts far from the task at hand. It was as though time had slowed down. The moments stretched out, and with every passing minute, Claire felt herself sinking deeper into a sea of doubt and uncertainty. What was she supposed to do now? Should she confront the flight attendant? Should she tell her father what happened?
No, she thought.
No one could fix this. Not even her father, with all his influence and power. But Claire felt something else bubbling inside her. A quiet strength, one that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. She had been the quiet observer in her father's world for so long, learning to keep her emotions in check, to hide behind the walls of privilege and expectation. But now, in the face of this humiliation, something snapped inside her. She wasn't just the daughter of the airline owner. She was Claire Harrison, and that was enough. The thought hit her with the force of a revelation. It wasn't about her father, or his name, or the empire he had built. It was about her own identity. The truth was, she had never felt fully seen, fully understood. And now, in this quiet cabin, she had the power to define herself. With renewed clarity, Claire stood up. The plane was still cruising at altitude, the soft murmur of the engines filling the space around her. As she made her way to the galley, her heart pounded in her chest. She was unsure of what exactly she was going to say, but she knew she couldn't let this moment pass. When she reached the galley, the flight attendant was standing behind the counter, her back turned as she prepared the drinks. Claire took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. The flight attendant spun around, her face flushed, and Claire saw the fear in her eyes. She knew exactly what she was going to say now. "I don't think you realize how damaging your words can be," Claire began. "I don't think you understand what it feels like to be dismissed for something you have no control over. You don't know who I am, but I've been dealing with the consequences of people judging me based on my last name my entire life. So yes, your words hurt, but I won't let them define me." The flight attendant opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock. Claire didn't wait for her to speak. She turned and walked away, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. As she returned to her seat, her heart was still racing, but it was different now. She had spoken her truth, and in doing so, she had reclaimed a part of herself that had been hidden for too long. The flight continued, the hours slowly passing by, but Claire felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. She was no longer just the daughter of someone powerful. She was Claire Harrison, and that was all that mattered. The rest of the journey passed in silence. The flight attendant kept her distance, and the tension between them remained. But now, Claire felt empowered. She didn't need anyone's approval. Her worth wasn't defined by a name. It was defined by who she was in this moment, and she would never again let anyone take that away from her. The plane touched down hours later, the wheels skimming the runway with a soft thud. Claire glanced out of the window one last time before gathering her things. She stood up, her steps steady and confident. The cabin door opened, and as she stepped into the terminal, she felt a quiet strength welling up inside her. She wasn't just a passenger on a plane. She was a woman who had taken control of her own destiny. As Claire stepped off the plane, her footsteps echoed in the sterile, polished hallway of the airport terminal. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting sharp shadows across the gleaming floors. It was an almost surreal moment, one of finality, a quiet transition from the tension of the flight to something that felt like freedom. Yet, beneath that calm exterior, her heart continued to race, thumping hard in her chest. She could still feel the weight of the flight attendant's eyes on her, the unspoken words, the discomfort that had permeated the entire cabin. But there was something else too, something deeper. The brief interaction had awakened a part of her that had been dormant for too long. Claire had always lived in the shadow of her father's legacy, a legacy that others seemed to respect and fear more than they ever respected her as a person. That silence, the brief moment when the attendant had frozen, had changed something inside Claire. She had never spoken up like that before. She had always been polite, subdued, letting things slide, allowing people to treat her as if she were invisible or, worse, a mere reflection of her father. But now, in that moment of confrontation, she had found herself, her own voice. As she made her way toward the baggage claim area, her mind continued to churn. Her body felt heavier with each step, but not from the exhaustion of the flight. No, it was something deeper, something that clung to her like a storm cloud hanging just over her head. She had spoken her truth. But what did it mean? What did it say about her? Claire's thoughts were interrupted by a soft ringing sound. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, seeing that it was a call from her father. She hesitated for a moment, her thumb hovering over the accept button. It wasn't unusual for him to call, but something about today felt different. Was it just the weight of the confrontation? Or was it something more, something she had been avoiding for years? With a deep breath, she answered the call. "Claire, my darling." Her father's voice came through, warm and comforting, yet laced with a tone she couldn't quite place. "How was your flight?" Claire paused, running a hand through her hair, trying to steady herself. "It was fine, Dad," she said, keeping her voice even. "Uneventful. Just long." She tried to ignore the growing tension in her chest. She wasn't sure what she expected, but his voice seemed different today. It had a weight to it, as if he was aware of something that she wasn't. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. She could feel the distance between them, more than just the physical distance of the thousands of miles between the airport and the mansion back home. It was emotional, a gap she had grown used to over the years. "Claire," her father began, his voice lowering slightly. "I need you to understand something. You know I've always done what was best for this company for you. But there are certain expectations." Claire's stomach churned. She knew exactly where this conversation was heading. It was the same thing he had always said, always done. The expectations he had for her. The plans he had mapped out for her future. His vision of what she was meant to be. But Claire was tired of being a part of his carefully constructed world. She was tired of playing the role that everyone wanted her to play. "I'm not a puppet, Dad," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Her voice wavered slightly, but it was a rawness she had never allowed herself to express before. "I'm not just your daughter. I'm me. And I'm not sure I can keep living in your shadow anymore." The words felt like a jagged breath, sharp and unexpected. She hadn't meant to say them, at least not like this, but they were out now. And the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Claire." Her father's voice was thick with something she couldn't place. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration either. It was disappointment. The kind of disappointment that stung deeper than anything else. "You know what this means. You know the role you were born into." Claire felt the walls closing in around her. The weight of her father's expectations had always been there, looming over her. But in this moment, with her phone pressed against her ear, she finally understood just how suffocating it had become. "I know," she whispered, her throat tightening as she tried to keep the tears at bay. "But I can't do it anymore. I can't be what everyone wants me to be. Not when I don't even know who I am." For a long moment, there was nothing but silence on the other end of the line. Claire's heartbeat pounded in her ears, louder than her father's voice ever had been. And then, softly, he spoke again. "I think you're making a mistake, Claire." His voice cracked just enough for her to hear the emotion underneath. "But I can't stop you. I never could." His words hit her like a blow to the chest. The finality in his voice was unmistakable. He had never really seen her as her own person. She had always been an extension of his world, his empire, his business. And now, for the first time, she was choosing to step away, to be her own person. Her throat felt tight, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. But then, as the weight of her decision settled over her like a heavy cloak, Claire felt something shift. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was something far more complex. A mixture of fear, anger, and, strangely, hope. "Goodbye, Dad," she said quietly. And with that, she ended the call. The airport around her buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to and from their gates. But for Claire, everything felt eerily still. She moved through the terminal, her thoughts swirling, her emotions in a turmoil she couldn't quite unravel. She had just taken the first step toward something she had never imagined for herself. But as she walked toward the exit, she realized something. She wasn't alone in this journey. Not anymore. The world outside the terminal seemed alive, full of endless possibilities. She could feel it in the air, the weight of change, of something profound shifting inside her. She was no longer the daughter of someone. She was Claire Harrison, the woman who had just made the hardest choice of her life. And for the first time in years, she felt something she had never felt before, free. But even as she stepped outside into the cool evening air, she knew this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead. There would be moments of doubt, of regret, of uncertainty. But she was ready. For the first time in her life, she was ready to face whatever came next. And nothing, not even the weight of her family's expectations, could take that away from her. The cold night air hit Claire as she stepped outside the terminal, the familiar hum of the airport slowly fading behind her. She took a deep breath, the chill brushing against her skin, but the world around her seemed strangely muted. The bustling crowds, the busy taxis pulling up to the curb, the endless stream of people hurrying toward their destinations. Everything felt distant, as if she were standing on the edge of some precipice, peering into a void she hadn't fully understood until now. She had just severed a tie that had bound her to everything she thought she was. Her father's empire, his expectations, his constant presence, these had shaped her existence for so long. But now, with one decision, Claire had stepped away from it all. She could feel the weight of that choice in every breath she took. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and exhilaration surging through her. She didn't know what was next. She had no concrete plans, no map that would lead her from here to a place where she could finally breathe freely. But the uncertainty was no longer something to be feared. It was a challenge, one that Claire felt she could face. But in the midst of the freedom she had so desperately longed for, there was still a question gnawing at her, a question she hadn't dared to ask until now. What did it mean to be free? How long could she run before the past caught up with her? The taxi ride to her apartment was quiet, the lights of the city flashing by like fragmented memories. Claire stared out the window, her reflection blending with the passing streets. It was like she was looking at a different version of herself, someone who had just woken up from a long, heavy sleep. But she wasn't sure she recognized that person. The truth was, she had never truly known who she was. She had lived in the shadow of someone else's life for so long that it had become her own. She had been molded into a role she never auditioned for, forced to fit into an image that didn't belong to her. And now, she was supposed to become something new, something entirely of her own making. But the uncertainty of it all was overwhelming. The taxi pulled up outside her apartment building, its lights cutting through the darkness. Claire didn't move at first. She just sat there, staring ahead, her mind lost in a swirl of emotions. She had broken free from her father, but in doing so, she had also broken the connection to everything that had ever given her security. Her family, her name, her legacy, they were all intangible now. She was standing on the precipice of a life she didn't know how to live. For so long, she had been told who she was supposed to be, who she was meant to become. But now that she was free from that, she realized she had no idea what that freedom looked like. What did Claire Harrison want for herself? What did she dream of? She stepped out of the taxi, her legs shaky beneath her. The building loomed above her, tall and cold, just like the life she had left behind. She walked into the lobby and took the elevator up to her floor. Inside her apartment, the stillness hit her like a wave. The walls, the furniture, the soft hum of the air conditioning, it all felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. She dropped her keys on the counter, her gaze drifting over the space she had lived in for years. For so long, this place had been her sanctuary, but now it felt like a prison. The truth was, Claire had never truly felt at home here. Not really. She had filled the space with material things, with luxury, with comfort. But the emptiness she had been running from had always been just beneath the surface, a feeling she could never shake. As she moved through the apartment, her footsteps echoing in the quiet, Claire felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her. But it wasn't just physical fatigue. It was the emotional weight of everything she had just done, everything she had just let go. She walked to the window and looked out at the city below. The lights of the skyline twinkled like stars in the distance, but they didn't comfort her the way they used to. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that something had been lost in her quest for freedom. The sound of her phone vibrating on the counter broke through her thoughts. Claire glanced at it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name on the screen. It was her father. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering over the phone. She had cut ties with him, but a part of her still wanted to hear his voice. A part of her still needed his approval, his validation. But she knew that if she answered, she would only be pulled back into the world she had just stepped away from. With a deep breath, Claire swiped the phone away, letting it ring unanswered. The silence in the room grew heavier, and Claire sank into the chair by the window, her body aching from the emotional toll of the day. She felt the weight of the decision she had made, but it wasn't the weight of regret. It was the weight of transformation. She had torn herself away from everything she had known, everything that had defined her. But now she was staring into the unknown, a world full of possibilities, but also full of uncertainty. What would her life look like now? What kind of person would she become? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of a message. She picked up her phone, reading the text with a growing sense of unease. It was from the flight attendant. "I'm so sorry for my behavior earlier," the message read. "I didn't know who you were. I was out of line. I hope you can forgive me." Claire stared at the message, a surge of emotion rushing through her. For a moment, she didn't know how to feel. Anger, disappointment, and, strangely, pity. The flight attendant had no idea what she had just started. The apology was a small, fragile thing, but it only highlighted the vast difference between who Claire had been and who she was becoming. She had always played by the rules, always let others walk all over her in the name of politeness, of maintaining appearances. But the world was changing. She was changing. And she couldn't go back to being the same person she had been. Not for anyone. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before she finally typed a response. "I forgive you. But you should know, I'm not who you think I am. And I'm not afraid to show you who I am either." She hit send before she could think better of it. Claire sat back, letting the silence wash over her once more. The world outside her apartment was still, but inside her, everything was shifting. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but for the first time, she felt like she was the one in control. And that was all she needed to move forward. Because from this moment on, Claire Harrison was going to find her own way. The message from the flight attendant lingered on Claire's phone screen, the words staring back at her like a mirror, reflecting everything she had just stepped away from. She could feel the weight of her response settling in her chest, but the unease wasn't just from the apology. It was the sense that, in forgiving the attendant, she had also opened a door to something she hadn't fully understood yet. Claire knew she wasn't the same person she had been when she boarded that plane. The woman who had allowed others to define her, who had cradled the expectations of her father like a crown, was now gone. She had shed that version of herself like an old skin, raw and exposed. But as she sat there, staring at the phone in her hand, a quiet terror began to creep in. What if she had made a mistake? What if this newfound freedom wasn't as liberating as it seemed? What if, in trying to escape her past, she was simply running toward something worse, something darker? Her heart thudded against her ribcage as she rose from the chair, pacing the room. The apartment, once her sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The walls seemed to close in, the silence pressing down on her like a heavy weight. She wasn't sure what she was afraid of. Perhaps it was the unknown. Or perhaps it was the realization that she had nothing left to hold on to. She had no plan, no destination, just the wide, empty expanse of her future. The thought made her feel small. Claire ran her fingers through her hair and approached the window again. The city below spread out before her like an endless sea of lights. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also overwhelming. She had spent so many years living in the bubble of her father's influence, cocooned in the luxury of his world, that now everything felt foreign. The city, her life, even her own emotions, they were all uncharted territory. The cold breeze drifted in from the cracked window, but it did little to clear her mind. Instead, the chill seemed to amplify the chaos inside her. She felt an ache in her chest, a longing for something, for anything, to anchor her. But nothing came. The phone vibrated again. Claire hesitated for a moment before picking it up. It was from her father. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but the moment stretched on, long and uncertain. She had shut him out once already today, but she couldn't avoid him forever. Could she? The message from her father appeared on the screen. Claire, you're making a mistake. I won't let you throw everything away for something you don't even understand. I've spent my life building this empire, and you think you can just walk away? You will regret this. I promise you that. Her fingers trembled as she read the words, each one a reminder of everything she had just turned her back on. He was right in a way. He had spent his life building an empire, one that had provided for her, sheltered her, and shaped her world. And now he was threatening to take that away from her. But she was no longer afraid of his threats. She had seen this side of him before, the control, the dominance, the guilt-tripping, and it never stopped. Every time she made a choice for herself, he tried to pull her back in, tried to make her feel small, insignificant. But not this time. Not anymore. She typed a response, her fingers flying across the screen with an urgency she hadn't expected. I know what I'm doing, Dad. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just taking a step toward finding myself. Without you, without your empire. I'm not afraid to live my own life. She stared at the message, the words hanging in the air. But then, she hesitated. What if he never understood? Her thumb hovered over the send button, the weight of her decision settling deep in her bones. Was she ready for this? For all the fallout that would come with it? The truth was there was no going back. She couldn't unmake this choice. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't from her father. It was from an unknown number. The message was simple, and yet, it made her stomach drop. I know what you did. Claire's pulse quickened. Her mind raced. Who could it be? Was it someone from her father's business? A warning? Or was it someone else? Someone who knew her secrets? Secrets she had buried for so long? Her fingers hovered over the phone, the screen casting a cold light on her face. She couldn't bring herself to open it. Couldn't bring herself to read the words that might change everything. But she knew she had to. There was no escaping the unknown now. With trembling hands, she opened the message. It was a photo. Her breath caught in her throat. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. It was her. The same scene she had tried so hard to forget. A moment from her past, one that had never truly gone away. The photo was taken years ago, at a lavish party her father had thrown for business associates. She had been young, naive, and drunk on the power of the world she had been raised in. And there, in the corner of the frame, was a man she had never expected to see again. A man she had tried to erase from her memory. Her heart raced as the familiar weight of guilt settled over her chest like a storm. The message below the photo sent a chill down her spine. We both know what really happened that night. And now, I want something in return. Claire felt the room spin around her. The past she had tried to bury, the mistakes she had made in the reckless pursuit of freedom, it was all coming back. The man in the photo was someone Claire had known for a brief moment, someone who had once held power over her, who had manipulated her, who had made her believe that she owed him something. And now he was back. And he was threatening her. The weight of her past came crashing into the present, and Claire felt the room close in around her. The freedom she had fought for seemed to slip away with every passing second, replaced by the heavy, suffocating fear of being exposed. Her hands shook as she stared at the phone, the message glowing back at her. She was trapped, caught between the life she had tried to escape and the one she was now forced to confront. For the first time in a long time, Claire felt the walls closing in on her. And no matter how hard she tried to break free, the past was still holding her hostage. As the days passed, Claire found herself caught in the whirlwind of her own emotions, her every step a balancing act between the woman she had become and the shadows of her past that still loomed over her. The photo, the message, everything that had been buried deep within her was now resurfacing with a vengeance. It felt like she had no control over the course of her life anymore. The freedom she had longed for had come with a price. The past, it seemed, was determined to follow her, no matter how far she ran. Each night, Claire would sit by the window, staring out at the city below, feeling the weight of the uncertainty pressing down on her. Her phone would ring at times, but she never answered. The messages kept coming, each one more cryptic, more insistent. The man in the photo hadn't stopped. His demands, his threats, they consumed her every thought. It was as though her past had finally found a way to drag her back into the very world she had fought so hard to escape. But then, one evening, as she sat there in the dim light, a new message appeared on her phone. For the first time in days, Claire didn't feel a rush of panic. She didn't feel that choking fear rising in her chest. Instead, she felt something else, a quiet resolve. The message was short. No picture. Just words. I never meant to hurt you, Claire. I was wrong. But you need to let it go. It was from him, the man from her past. The man she had hoped to forget, but who had kept resurfacing in her life, like a bad dream. The message didn't bring relief. It didn't make her feel safe. But it did something else. It made her realize that the only person who could free her from this cycle, from the weight of her past, was herself. The next morning, Claire took a deep breath and decided to face the storm head-on. She packed a small bag, left her apartment, and walked out into the world, knowing full well that whatever was waiting for her, she would confront it with strength. She had come to terms with the fact that she couldn't outrun her past forever, but she could choose how to face it. The streets outside her apartment were busy, just like any other day. People were going about their lives, caught up in their own struggles, their own dramas. But for Claire, everything felt different. The sun seemed to shine a little brighter, the air felt a little warmer, and she could finally breathe. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. As she walked, she thought about the people who had tried to control her, to make her feel like she was nothing more than a name, a legacy to be used. But they couldn't define her anymore. They couldn't take her voice. She had learned that the hard way. And now, she was ready to make her own choices. She turned the corner and stopped in front of a cafe, the same one she used to visit with her father when she was younger. It had always been a place of comfort, but now, it felt like the beginning of something new. Claire walked inside and ordered a coffee, sitting down by the window. As she sipped it, she glanced at the bustling street outside. She felt the weight of her decisions, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt freeing. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Claire didn't mind. She was no longer bound by anyone's expectations but her own. And that, she realized, was more than enough. It was time to let go of the past. And as the sun began to set, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, Claire's phone buzzed again. She didn't check it immediately. Instead, she smiled to herself, knowing that whatever it was, it couldn't touch her anymore. And then, as if on cue, the phone vibrated once more. She picked it up, her fingers trembling just a little. The message was from the same unknown number, the man from her past. It simply read, "I hope one day you can forgive me. I was wrong, Claire. I'm sorry." Claire stared at the screen for a moment, the words sinking deep into her chest. She could feel the anger, the hurt, and the guilt all wash over her. But this time, it was different. This time, she had the power to decide. She had the strength to forgive, not for him, but for herself. With a steady hand, she typed one final message. "I forgive you, but I'm no longer the person you knew. And that's okay." She hit send, then turned her phone off. There was nothing left to say. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of doubt, of fear, of sadness. But Claire had made her choice. And for the first time, she felt at peace with it. As she finished her coffee, she stood up and stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air as if for the first time. The city stretched out before her, full of possibilities. Her past was behind her, and the future, though uncertain, was hers to claim. The camera pulls away, capturing her standing tall against the backdrop of a vibrant, bustling city. The sun sets behind her, and as the world moves around her, she moves forward, into the unknown, with hope, courage, and the strength to define herself. If you've enjoyed Claire's journey, this moment of self-discovery, and the emotional ride we've shared, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories and join us as we explore the world through the eyes of those who dare to change their destinies. You won't want to miss what's next. Subscribe now, and let's write the next chapter together.